top brass at the South African Police Service have dragged their feet in cancelling a dodgy tender awarded to a controversial figure notoriously known as the Cat.
He's a businessman with a colourful array of interests, but the commonality in all of his dealings is that he has a close proximity to state procurement.
Well, that's our specialist investigative journalist, Jeff Wicks, who accessed an internal audit report revealing that tender tycoon Vusimusi Matlala should never have scored a 360 million rand health services contract with the SAPS. It's a deal now subject to criminal proceedings.
Vusimusi Matlala's company should never even have proceeded past phase 1 of the procurement, let alone win the tender.
This conversation next. And later in the show, the Catholic world mourns, holding its breath for a new pope. And finally, a South African success story, as many more of us swiping and tipping.
To stay tuned to The Lead for every edition, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels.
And if you'd like to be in our next edition, mail us, thelead@24.com. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. The highest office of the South African Police Service knew full well that a 360 million rand health services tender should never have gone to controversial businessman Vusimusi Matlala. Yet it took its sweet time to cancel this deal. National Police Commissioner Fannie Masemola could have done so immediately, but instead erred for 2 months before warning Matlala with a letter. By that point, the Cat's company, Medicare 24 Tshwane District, had already bagged 18.5 million rand. This is considered irregular state spending. But for more on what the internal SAPS audit report reveals, we're joined now by specialist investigative journalist Jeff Wicks from our Johannesburg studios. Thanks so much, Jeff, for joining us here on The Lead. Happy post-long Easter weekend.
Thank you for having me, Graeme.
Fantastic. Let's remind our listeners first who the Cat is here. As part of your 9 Lives investigative series of reports for News 24, he was first sort of implicated in the Tembisa hospital procurement scandal under investigation by the SIU. Is that right?
If we're going to talk about Vusimusi Matlala, we can sum him up neatly. He's a businessman with a colourful array of interests, but the commonality in all of his dealings is that he has a close proximity to state procurement. And that's where he first appeared on our radar when we were investigating Tembisa hospital procurement. And we found that he was among a raft of individuals who had been red flagged by Babita Deokaran for his business interests with Tembisa Hospital. And that's what our investigation initially set out 2 years ago, was that through 3 shelf companies, he was doing a roaring trade with the facility, and we could also place him in larger syndicates of extraction which were operating at the hospital.
Okay, so I think per your latest reporting, there's a fantastic sort of graph that lays out the chronology of events as related to this very controversial SAPS tender. We understand that the police service thus post the initial health services bid window, that was in January 2024, before the Cat then clinches this contract later in June. What is this tender for exactly here, Jeff?
So it's called a health and risk services tender. It's a 3-year deal which has a rand value of at least 360 million rand. And this is state procurement which is of pivotal importance. You know, the police have 180,000 staff members, and the health and risk services supplier, in this case Mr. Matlala, will have to do pre-fitness medical screenings. He will have to assess whether or not policemen are ready to be medically boarded or to go on to retirement. So this is something that is going to have far-reaching implications if it falls apart. And I think it's important to note that Mr. Matlala clinched this deal through a company which has been in existence for only 5 years. In the years in which it's been trading, hasn't had a turnover of more than 100,000 rand up until June of last year, when it lands this massive state tender. And this will be a windfall for Mr. Matlala for at least the next 3 years to come.
Okay, by the end of the year, the chronology of events reveals that the Cat is then embroiled in this kidnapping saga. He resigns from his company. He then installs a new proxy, if you'd like, a face of the company, a director switch in Claudette Masete. But still, he keeps controlling interest. And by January this year, 2025, he then gets the first 18.5 million rand. Now, the internal audit report that you've managed to get access to, Jeff, then reveals that first irregular spending should not have happened. What did the internal findings show us? That the tender process essentially was flawed from the outset, right?
Yeah, I think that's the importance of the police's own audit. The first is to consider that it was set in motion by Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. He is the one who ordered Fannie Masemola to audit this tender. And what auditors found when they examined the paperwork was a litany of red flags. In essence, we need not deal with each of them, save to say that Vusimusi Matlala's company should never even have proceeded past phase 1 of the procurement, let alone win the tender. So now we have a situation where this tender has been awarded and the cracks in terms of service delivery have already begun to show. We know from our previous reportage that the police have taken issue with Mr. Matlala and his company for rampant underperformance. There are 5 separate work streams in this police tender, and he recorded 100% underperformance across 3 of those 5. So the cracks started to show early this year. And now we know that Mr. Matlala has significant issues servicing his debt. His company faces liquidation. And this is the police's service provider. That's only looking at this specific entity. When you look outside of the person Cat is, he is a man perpetually plagued by scandal. In December last year, one of the police's foremost suppliers is embroiled as a suspect in a double kidnapping drama. And before that, his probity is called into question with the way he did business with Tembisa Hospital. This is not the police covering themselves in glory. And it gets made worse by the fact that our National Police Commissioner, the accounting officer of the SAPS, is warned at the end of January that there's a litany of red flags that surround this tender. You're within your rights in terms of the agreement to cancel it outright. And then we have 54 days of nothing. 54 days in which the National Commissioner considers his position. We'd love to know what he was doing in that time. Sadly, he won't tell us. But at the end of it, he sends a letter putting Matlala on terms saying, you've got 2 weeks to explain yourselves as to why we should not cancel this tender. So we sit in a position now where we understand the importance of this procurement. We still don't know what's happening to this day with it. Are the police going to have to retender, go out again if Mr. Matlala can't perform, or does he keep this deal that he managed to clinch midway through last year?
And it also begs the question, what happened in those 54 days, Jeff? Was there sort of a warning, perhaps, that we're not aware of, put through to the CAT? One can only speculate, and without any proof, it does sort of muddy the waters. What's more interesting to me is that SAPS senior staffer Brigadier Petunia Lenono, who actually sat on the tender bid committees, then leaves the SAPS and then later joins up with the CAT. What happened there?
Yeah, so this is a sticking point for the police. And, in terms of their contract with Matlala, he was prohibited from hiring any of their staff members who had a role in either tailoring the bid specifications or awarding the bid. And that's for the duration of the contract. We know from our previous reportage that Brigadier Petunia Lenono, who was head of the police's psychology services, resigns in June. Just 3 weeks before this tender is awarded. Within 6 months, she has an official Medicare 24 Tshwane District email address and is dealing with suppliers. That looks to me like javelin throwing. And at least that's what the allegation is. She had a hand in tailoring this tender through the
specification. And Jeff, sorry, what is that javelin throwing to people who don't understand that term?
So javelin throwing is when an individual will have a hand in tailoring the specifications of the tender and then leaves and then benefits from it post fact. So that's what the allegation will be against Petunia Lenono. But, when we think about the contract itself, her very presence at the heart of this thing is ample, or gives Fannie Masemola ample opportunity to cancel this tender outright. Instead, we're seeing a kid gloves approach. You have 2 weeks to submit representations as to why this deal should not be cancelled, when he has locus standi to cancel it outright. And we know from every document that is leaked to us that he has grounds upon grounds upon grounds to cancel this tender. And now we're asking the question as to why he hasn't yet.
And I thought quite interesting is that even if the deal, so to speak, was legit at the end of the day, say hypothetically it was all sort of fine, it went through the proper normal sort of Finance Management Act procurement processes. At the end of the day, still the cat's business wasn't even legitimized or in the perfect position to carry out the work anyway, right? Because he didn't have all the correct sort of licensing in place.
Well, so this is where this story becomes difficult to understand. So when this procurement went out to tender, obviously Mr. Matlala threw his hat in the ring. What we're saying from our investigation is that this minnow company would never have been able to deliver on this tender if it was standing alone. We understand that they have outsourced a lot of this work to other service providers, which in and of itself is somewhat problematic, but not entirely unlawful. Now that we're at a hinge point where Mr. Matlala is struggling to deliver on this tender and his suppliers are going unpaid and service delivery has become impacted, we say, is this finally time that the police commissioner will act and bring this tender to an end? Or are we going to or will we continue to see Mr. Matlala given preferential treatment? Because that's what it appears like from the outside, that the National Police Commissioner is giving Mr. Matlala every indulgence to keep this deal, even when red flags abound from the very procurement process and its basis to where we are now, where he cannot actually deliver on this tender and his company faces liquidation.
Jeff, you've gotten some feedback, some sort of engagement from the CAT in, a written response in the past for other reporting. But to my understanding, you haven't received any feedback from the Commissioner nor the CAT for this latest report. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. Mr. Matlala seems unwilling to answer our questions, which is his right, and we'll give him the space that he needs. But this is a matter that's not going to go away. We'll continue to report on this and other deals that concern Mr. Matlala up until the point that he is held to account. The more concerning issue is the silence of the police. Now, the South African police service seems to labor under the misconception that this is communist China and the affairs of the state are no one else's business other than the state. That's not true. This concerns public funds and the taxpayer purse, and this deal and others will face intense scrutiny from us, because now we understand that the police's own internal auditors have said, whoa, hang on, this is irregular expenditure. At best, at worst, it's fruitless and wasteful. We need to tread carefully here. And now what did the police commissioner do with that warning? And that's going to be critical going forward.
I feel like some of the comments that have been commenting on your reporting, let's take one of the examples, Roy and Terry, they wrote, well done on the investigation, quote unquote, pity nothing will come of it. How do you respond to such nihilism in this public context, Jeff, as one of our specialist investigative journalists? There's a lot of cynicism out there. People feel negative about the state capabilities to recoup some of that money that was irregularly spent, that 18.5 million rand. In my mind's eye, it would be a similar process that we've seen throughout the State Capture Commission, that the SIU would be the biggest proponent of trying to get that money back. But responding to that sort of sentiment, how do you feel about that? People feeling they're losing trust in the system.
I think trust was lost long ago, Graeme, and I understand the cynicism. I find myself being cynical a lot of the time as well. But the reality is we'll continue to do our work. Our job as journalists is not to recoup money. Our job is to take the truth and push it into the public domain, and that's exactly what we'll do. And we are encouraged by the fact that organizations in this story want to keep things hidden from us. We see it as a challenge, and we will definitely be publishing more on this tender.
Sure. And that's Jeff Wicks, our specialist investigative journalist. Thank you so much for your time and for your reporting on this. I can't wait for the next installment in the 9 Live series. I'm sure it's going to be a humdinger because this chapter is definitely not closed as yet.
Thanks for having me, Graeme. I appreciate it.
To our trending topic now, and as the world mourns the late Pope Francis, history shows that voting for his 267th successor will begin sometime in the next 3 weeks or so. That will see a conclave or meeting of Roman Catholic cardinals in the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City to elect a new pope who will need a 2/3 majority of their votes. The ballot is supposed to be highly secretive and not unnecessarily long, which has come under public scrutiny over the decades. If a vote fails to reach the minimum 2/3 majority, cardinals are then required to rest, reflect, and pray. Only once the well-known white smoke appears from the top of the chapel will you and I know that a new pontiff has been elected. First, though, the late Pope Francis will be laid to rest this Saturday with a mass in St. Peter's Square. Meanwhile, world leaders have been commending him for his progressive agenda. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the 88-year-old pontiff will be remembered for advancing his worldview of inclusion and equality for the marginalized. Anglican Archbishop Thabo Makgoba echoed this, calling the Pope one of the world's last leading moral voices and a champion of the poor's hopes and dreams. And finally, in your business news, the popular local card machine provider Yoco says it's paid out almost R1 billion in tips to the country's casual workers. Yoco's executives say that's thanks to its special tipping feature included in the checkout process. When that's on, the company claims South Africans tend to be, more generous, tipping roughly 3 times more than usual. About a decade since its launch, the proudly South African Yoco is one of the largest point-of-sale system providers here. That's more than 200,000 merchants on its books. The company specifically went after primarily small businesses, customers it says were being left behind by the big banks. Some of you in the News 24 comments section are even calling on Yoco to provide such a service for our car guards, seeing as so many of us don't carry cash anymore. That story's thanks to News 24 business journalist William Brederode. Well, from dodgy police tenders to cash-strapped South Africans tipping more, we live in a country with many interesting divergent realities. We'd love more of your mails, comments, and especially voice notes. You can mail them to thelead@24.com. There are only 2 more editions to follow this week due to the recent public holidays. In the meantime, you can hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels to be reminded as to when they are released. My name is Graeme Raubenheimer. So long as there's news, we'll have the lead.